Welcome to the first ever BWSI SWE Build a CubeSat Challenge final event. My name is Gary Friedman. I'm one of the mentors, judges, and guest speakers for the Build a CubeSat course. Over the past several months, teams of high school students from across the country have been working through this rigorous online course to learn how to design, build, and test their very own satellite prototype. After completing modules on orbital dynamics, the space environment, systems engineering, communications, power engineering, propulsion, thermal conductivity management, control systems, and satellite development tools, including Python, the students accepted the challenge to complete a series of hands-on projects culminating in their final presentations today. Each team began developing their hardware skills by building a flat sat and taking a picture of their team with their Raspberry Pi camera. They used that flat sat to learn about the parts of a satellite through subsystem labs. During their final project, the students applied everything that they learned to design their very own prototype CubeSat. Each team submitted a design review video to get feedback from the judges. They have now implemented their design and submitted a video demonstrating their CubeSat's performance, which we will see highlights of later on today. This program is run as a collaboration between the Society of Women Engineers and MIT's BeaverWorks Summer Institute. It's made possible by the contributions of experts from MIT campus, MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, as well as all of the mentors and coaches who directly supported students. Here to tell you more about BeaverWorks is Joel Grimm.
Hello, my name is Joel Grimm. I'm here at MIT BeaverWorks, which is a collaboration between MIT and Lincoln Laboratory. I'll come back to collaboration in a minute, but I'd like to tell you why BeaverWorks is important. What is BeaverWorks? BeaverWorks is an idea, and MIT is a place where ideas are fostered, grown, and sometimes even kicked around a little bit to see if they're any good or not. The idea at BeaverWorks, started by our BeaverWorks director, Bob Shin, is a place where more ideas can be grown. So BeaverWorks is a place created by Lincoln Laboratory and MIT out of collaboration for collaboration. As a place, and actually we're located in more than one spot, we're on MIT and have our original space at 300 Technology Square, and now have newer space in Building 31 with the Aero Astra department. But that's the thing about ideas, they tend to spread. These places serve many purposes by design: for collaboration, for classrooms, and prototyping. The idea that we can take real-world projects that we see at Lincoln Laboratory and challenge MIT students to develop new and unique solutions, researching, testing, prototyping, as they learn how to be scientists and engineers is one of the strengths of BeaverWorks. An idea is just an idea until you build it. And the shops are where you can do that, to go from ideas to prototypes. So much is learned in the process of creating and building. And as collaboration is key to innovation, we want the collaboration with scientists and students to inspire great things for them to do more and go farther with their ideas. BeaverWorks inspires students to do great things and lead to more great things, like the BeaverWorks Summer Institute. It's a place like MIT where ideas are encouraged and brought to life. It was started in 2016 in response to a challenge to Dr. Bob Shin to create a program that uses the MIT mindset to collaborate, to work together, to use projects to learn how to do things, and with a focus on computer science and artificial intelligence and technologies, and specifically for high school students, because we saw students coming into college without some of those skills. This is what BWSI is at the core. It's project-based with teamwork, and we have scientists and engineers who are doing active research coming to teach courses in the summer. It's so exciting to see them be able to share their research with students. Our first year started small with 46 students, but we had big plans to move forward on this. We started with the Autonomous Race Car Challenge, which was a college-level course for MIT students. Bringing it to high school students and seeing them succeed was amazing to see them learn to program by creating these autonomous cars. Flashing forward to our 6th year in 2021, we were able to pivot to run a virtual program, but we're still growing, still creating new content, and still impacting more students. We are creating satellite programs in other areas. They're able to use our same content. We're adding new content every year and increasing the number of skills that students can learn about in different technology areas. Expanding the impact of BWSI. We've got many ways we're trying to do that. We're creating more courses every year, like I said, but not only are we creating more content for the summer program, but we're also putting that content online to make it available for independent study. In the spring and the fall, we have shorter programs that focus on getting underrepresented groups and younger students involved. And finally, we're developing partner programs like the Build a CubeSat program, partnering with professional organizations that help provide the guidance and the mentoring for student teams to build their own prototypes and learn engineering in the process. Finally, BeaverWorks is transformational, providing opportunities for students to learn, to grow farther than they thought they could, and become more than they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Like Joel mentioned, the Build a CubeSat Challenge is a partner program. We have partnered with the Society of Women Engineers, or SWE, to help organize and judge the challenge, as well as recruit mentors to work directly with each team. Here to tell you more about SWE is Elizabeth Morrow.
Hi everyone, I'm Ellie Marwa. I'm the VP of K-12 Outreach for the Society of Women Engineers, Boston section. And I'm here to tell you a little bit more about what the Society of Women Engineers is and how you can get involved. So a little bit more about SWE, or the Society of Women Engineers. We call it SWE for short. So it's a nonprofit organization. It's a worldwide organization. And its mission is to empower women to achieve their full potential in their careers as engineers and leaders in the engineering and technology areas. So their full vision is a world with gender parity and equality in engineering and technology. A little bit more about what SWE provides to its members. So we have a bunch of different programs, and that spans from professional development, like training or webinars or speakers, things like that, networking, meeting people in the area that are also female engineers, scholarships, and outreach, and also advocacy activities. So SWE Boston, so each section of SWE is run independently. So each metro area or geographic area in the world has its own Society of Women Engineers section. And these sections are all run independently by volunteers such as myself. So we're actually in Boston, one of the first 4 founding sections of SWE back in 1950. It was founded by 4 members, and alongside New York, Philly, and DC were the other 3 founding sections. So right now, we actually have over 700 members, which is huge. So each section, Boston being one of them, is run by, usually has a president and then has several vice presidents, such as myself, that run the different pillars of activity. So my section is K-12 outreach. So I run activities for students in the area and the communities to reach out and teach them more about STEM and do some hands-on activities. So there's also the professional development pillar, which is, trainings and speakers and webinars and things like that. And then membership, which does fun activities like brunch and book club and stuff like that. So this is the Boston professional section. There's also plenty of collegiate sections in the Boston area. So there can be sections of professionals, of college students, and there's also a program called SWENext where K-12 students can start their own SWE sections. So a little bit more about that SWENext. If you're K-12, you can sign up for free, totally free program. You can start your own SWENext chapter if you want. If you have friends at your school, or you have a community members that would want to join with you, you can start your own chapter, which is really cool. can be your own SWE section. There's also tons of other activities and resources on SWENext. As an individual, you can go on. There's events in the area that are posted. There's tons of activity ideas. So if you want to do a hands-on activity at home, you can log on and see all the different ideas there. There's a really good newsletter that they put out. You don't even have to be a member to get the newsletter, but we do encourage it. So it has profiles of different engineers, so students or professional engineers of different disciplines. So if you're not sure if you want to get into engineering, or you are sure you want to get into engineering, but you're not sure what discipline, this is a great resource to read those profiles and see, you know, what do these women do day to day, and see if that's something you want to get into. Another great thing on here is scholarships. So that's another reason to log on to SWENext and become a member. So thanks for listening, and I hope you learned more about SWE.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks in part to the support from SWE, we were able to give each team and each mentor a hardware kit that included everything they need to complete the labs and build their own 1U size CubeSat prototype. Although the kits don't include space qualified components, they do include representations of each of the major subsystems you would see on a real spacecraft. Here to give you some background on CubeSats is MIT professor Carrie Cahoy.
Hi, I'm Carrie Cahoy. I am an associate professor here at MIT in aeronautics and astronautics. I also direct the Space, Telecommunications, Astronomy and Radiation, or STAR Lab. One of the things we do for research in STAR Lab is we develop new technologies and we fly them to space on CubeSats. I'm very excited to be here and be involved with the BeaverWorks Build a CubeSat program because we need all the help we can get. Developing and building and operating a space mission takes a lot of people in all different disciplines, and I'm excited to be working with you guys and look forward to hopefully seeing you either working with us in our lab or in the industry in partner labs in the near future. I'd like to just show a few slides about CubeSats, their history, and how they get to orbit. On this first slide is an illustration of a mission that we're working on for NASA. It's called the CubeSat LaserCom Infrared Crosslink mission, or CLIC, and we're going to send up two CubeSats, CLIC B and CLIC C. There is a CLIC A as well, to do a crosslink of data using lasers from satellite to satellite on orbit. All right, so CubeSats. There used to be a big amount of interest around what would happen when the year changed from 1999 to 2000, and the CubeSats were invented in 1999. The CubeSat unit is called a U. 1U is 10 centimeters, a cube with 10 centimeters on each side, and the standard mass is about 1.33 kilograms. You can, in theory, stack and combine your CubeSat units, kind of like Legos almost. We are working on that, as I'll show in the next slide. And here's a couple of images that show the scale of a person working on a traditional satellite compared to this little red box here, which is the size of a CubeSat. So that's about the size scale. So satellites, we basically shrunk them and their capabilities from being something that was nearly school bus sized to something that was much more like a shoebox. We are working at MIT in my lab on an idea to stack them together even more like Legos. So this is a project that two grad students, Mary Dahl and Esne and Meng, are working on, where we have a robot to put together CubeSats on orbit. And so we had the students develop parts that snap together and can hold an electronics board in each, and you could have a container of different parts on orbit and then be able to put them together on orbit in just the way you needed, with just the right amount of propulsion or the camera or the electronics board you might need, or to replace something. So this is just to emphasize that, we really would like to stack them together like Legos, even if it's not quite like that right now. And this would reduce cost, and the satellites wouldn't need to really be tested, assembled on the ground to survive the rocket shaking, because they'd just be packaged in their boxes. And it would allow us to get things on orbit even faster than we already do. So this object looks a lot like what a jack-in-the-box looks like, but it's not. It's a satellite. So one of the ways that CubeSats, they were able to convince people to let CubeSats get to launch inexpensively is to have them be protected. If you have a big, expensive spacecraft on a rocket, you don't really want to put it in danger by having this, cheap, inexpensive student-built satellite on the rocket with you. So they basically decided that, oh, we'll make a little safe box, we'll put the CubeSat in it and then bolt it to the rocket. And that way it'll only come out after the main satellite's gone, when everything's safe. And that ended up working out. So the spring-loaded box is a CubeSat deployer box. You literally load the satellite in it, snap the lid shut, and then bolt it into the rocket, kind of like this. And not joking, you literally bolt it onto the rocket. So this is an example of some of the earliest ones. On top of the Bion M1 spacecraft on a Soyuz initially. So this is BSat 2, 3, and Aussie, and one of the very first doves in the back right. So this is a pretty exciting picture, but yeah, you literally do just bolt them to the rocket, and then you have to get them to orbit. So this is after multiple years of launching CubeSats, people started to really do it in earnest. And this was one of the first missions. It's a PSLV that launched from India, where they actually figured out how to get over 100 CubeSats on board the rocket with one big satellite at the same time. And so this is a kind of fun video that shows 88 planet CubeSats, as well as several others being deployed, kind of like clowns from a clown car.
From both sides, one after another.
And they're just coming out one after another. And you can see them kind of deploying. Off they go. If we wait a few more seconds, they deploy the next one, then they open the box, the spring pushes the CubeSat out. And they just kept that up for a whole bunch of minutes to get all 100 of them out. So that's a big deal, and it's kind of where we are now. So that's one way, is just to be directly launched on the rocket. Another way is to have kind of an intermediate trip where you get put on the rocket, but instead of being bolted to it in the deployer, you're packed away as cargo, and you go to the International Space Station, and then the robot arm or an astronaut deploy you. Here are some examples of that. So on the left, this is a cosmonaut that is pitching out a Peruvian CubeSat. I'm just going to advance to where the action is.
Ready to cast it away
and
for its science mission.
So he's on an extravehicular activity, an EVA, and had that CubeSat in his pack, and his job is to deploy it. And so kind of like opening day for baseball, perhaps with a little bit more of a gentle throw. That CubeSat is on its way. Another way to do it is to, once you're unpackaged from the Cygnus spacecraft, is to be deployed from the robotic arm. So they actually put the deployer boxes on the robotic arm, and then they command the deploy. This is actually one of our CubeSats being deployed. Videos are all courtesy of NanoRacks. So these are fun. And this is what they look like. But the nice part about being launched from the space station is that they have cameras and astronauts with the cameras. And so you can get really nice pictures of the deployment, which otherwise you're kind of stuck with the slightly grainy video from the rocket, like we were showing from the PSLV. So it's always fun when you get the nice images from the space station. And just to wrap up, we've got a couple more coming up next on the launch pad. So these were two that completely different missions that were developed in my lab that ended up being integrated into the same deployer completely by chance at NanoRacks this past March. On March 30th, our students went down there and put these together and integrated these. So this is Click A. This is a laser communication downlink 3U CubeSat, and this is Beaver Cube 1, which will be taking pictures, thermal images and optical images of the Earth for looking at coastal change and climate change. All right, well, good luck to everyone. I hope you have a wonderful experience, and I'm excited to be part of it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carrie. The Build a CubeSat Challenge final project challenges the teams to design, build, and test a CubeSat prototype for a real science mission. This year, we worked with Dr. Colin Ward and Paul Fusil from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution to look at using CubeSats with an imaging sensor to detect plastics in the ocean. Here to tell you more about the science behind this year's mission is Dr. Colin Ward.
Hello, my name is Colin Ward. I am a scientist at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, or WHOI as we call it, is the largest oceanographic research institution in the world. There's over 1,000 employees, and there's also an academic programs office that is linked up with MIT, where we have undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral students. We study all phases of Earth and ocean sciences, and overall our mission is to better understand how the ocean works and how it is being perturbed by human forces. My personal research focuses on the fate of organic molecules in the ocean, such as crude oil or microplastics or even naturally derived organic compounds. So for instance, in the microplastics world, I study how sunlight breaks down plastics into different gases, such as carbon dioxide, that is a greenhouse gas, as well as dissolved organic molecules that can be used by microbes as food sources. The science mission for the Build a CubeSat challenge this year is motivated by one of the most pressing environmental issues today, plastic pollution. It's estimated that upwards of 10 million tons of plastics enter the ocean each year, but the fate and ecosystem impacts of this material are poorly understood. When this plastic debris is exposed to the elements, specifically sunlight, it can be degraded into smaller and smarter particles, often called microplastics. These microplastics generally cause more harm than the larger pieces of plastic that they're made from. However, it's extremely challenging to clean up little pieces of plastic in the ocean. So one of the short-term solutions to the ocean plastic pollution problem is to clean up the larger pieces of plastic before they become smaller pieces that can cause ecological harm. One type of plastic that the community is targeting is derelict or abandoned fishing gear, such as nets. Sometimes these nets are referred to as ghost nets because we don't know where they came from or who they belong to. These materials make up nearly half of the floating plastic debris in the oceans by mass and have a huge potential to be broken down by sunlight into microplastics over time. So for example, a net that was 1 cubic meter in size could become 1 billion cubic millimeter microplastic particles as it degrades by sunlight over time. So instead of aimlessly cruising around the ocean looking for abandoned fishing nets, our scientific mission for you all was to develop a small cube satellite that could spot floating fishing gear from space. This information could then be relayed to cleanup crews on ships to remove these fishing nets before they get broken down into microplastics and cause ecological damage. I apologize that I won't be able to attend the final presentations. I have a newborn at home that needs my attending, but I sincerely hope that the missions went well and that you learned a lot thinking about the ways to solve this important environmental problem. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have follow-up questions or would like to learn more about WHOI or Earth and Ocean Sciences in general. My email is cward@whoi.edu. Have a great summer, folks.
Thank you, Colin. And now it's time to hear how you approach this mission. After each team presents, we'll have a few minutes for questions from our judges. Now, for those of you in the audience, you can post any questions you have for the teams in the questions box in the upper right-hand corner of the webcast page. On deck, we have the Midnight Mechanics. But first, please welcome Team Seaforce.
Hi, we're Seaforce.
I'm Sydney.
I'm Olivia.
And I'm Audie, and we're based in Lexington, Massachusetts, and this is our final presentation for the CubeSat challenge. So first is our system overview, which includes our CubeSat system and its mission. So like Mr. Ward mentioned earlier, the task at hand is to design a CubeSat that will detect ocean plastic before it can turn into microplastics. And hopefully our project will help scientists and also help us learn more to help in the future.
So as you can see, this is our original CAD model. It has all the major components of a CubeSat, of our CubeSat. It has a Raspberry Pi, a battery, IMU, and Noir camera, which are all within the casing. And then we also have our solar panel on the outside. We also left a large amount of space on the inside to manage our batteries in. Yeah, wires.
So this section is our results from both our testing and our final demo. So this is our CubeSat. On the left is more of like an outside view, and on the right you can see like each of the individual layers with the camera, IMU, Pi, battery, etc. So how our CubeSat works is everything starts at the ground station. So the ground station is SSH'd into the Raspberry Pi, and it tells it to start its orbit. Then the CubeSat will start taking photos and then upload these photos to GitHub on the cloud. And then the ground station will be able to pull these images from GitHub in order to process them. And then it will upload the processed photos to get back to GitHub and also send any relevant information back to the Raspberry Pi, the CubeSat, using SCP.
So for our software design, we first made sure we could take photos in set time intervals, usually 5 to 10 seconds. And then we made sure we were able to push those photos to GitHub. After that, we got the edge detection to work at the preliminary stage, and then we worked on applying the Canny algorithm. From the ground station, we retrieved the pictures and processed them using OpenCV. So the processing is done at the ground station. And then we intend to send relevant information in a text file to a folder in Raspberry Pi using SCP, secure copy. This is a photo of the contours of different elements that we were able to find using OpenCV.
So there are some potential sources of error from our images. The images could be blurry due to things like smudging and other random factors. There could also be noise in our environment that could disrupt the signal. Our CubeSat was also handheld, so it wasn't exactly a secure way to move it around. And another problem that we encountered were the color ranges were subject to differences in lighting and shadows that could often throw off the picture, so we can't find the contours.
Yeah, so because our project was ultimately a success, there are some implications. One is theoretically we'd be able to recognize large collections of plastic in the ocean, as well as using OpenCV, the color of it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to record the size or location of plastic, but once again, results may also be subject to error. So this section is how we would scale our prototype up to actual flight spacecraft.
So one of the main adaptations we would make is to increase the signal range using an antenna and dish. We would also want to increase our data and power storage as we would be flying for a longer orbit and covering more distance. We would also add more solar panels to increase the power, and we would also like to test for resonance and vibration for the launch and any other obstacles it would encounter in space, as well as shielding from radiation and a propulsion system as many actual satellites have. We would also need to adjust the color ranges for an ocean, as it would be very different from what we encountered for our experiment.
So we learned many things from build and test efforts. So these were our original plans, and you can see what's highlighted what was changed. So initially we planned to process the photos directly from the CubeSat, but it was difficult to use OpenCV from the CubeSat, so we ended up processing the photos from the ground station. And we also didn't end up implementing the IMU calibration or ADCS system since we had some difficulties, which Olivia will talk about later.
So our hardware subsystem didn't really change all that much, but a few key differences is we ended up drilling our own holes to solve the acrylic side panel problem. We also binded the wires with tape to be able to manage them inside the CubeSat so they wouldn't knock other components around. And we also had a little bit of a problem with L brackets having to be positioned very specifically. And actually one of them we had to leave out as the camera did not leave space for it. Another very big issue that we encountered was the ADCS system, which stands for the Attitude, Determination, and Control System. This is used to find the location, orientation, and acceleration of the CubeSat, which is very useful. So ours had a accelerometer, magnetometer, and gyroscope, which the way we were supposed to calibrate this was using a graph weight, yaw, roll, and pitch values, but we were not able to calibrate it correctly, and therefore we were not able to integrate it at all into our CubeSat.
So for our communication subsystem, we also ran into a few issues. We put in a lot of work and intended to originally use Bluetooth. Everything in our lab worked and we were able to get distance, but at the final stage, we weren't actually able to transfer images. So we asked in Piazza and finally ended up going with Wi-Fi. But as we chose Wi-Fi, we actually found that had some good advantages. Originally, Bluetooth seemed like the best, is a very desirable option because it consumes less power. But with a Wi-Fi connection, we can also have a faster speed and push more data at once. But it does consume significantly more power. If given more time, there's a lot of things we would have liked to do. We would have liked to refine the OpenCV algorithm for better accuracy, as a lot of the times it would pick up light shadows as separate contours. And we also would have liked to return more information about the plastic. And we would have also liked to integrate the ADCS, as Olivia mentioned. And we would have also written a program to automate the ground station commands, because while we did a significant portion of it manually, and while it was okay here, in a real application, that wouldn't be very practical.
So these are takeaways from the challenge. So just over the course of the challenge, we learned many different things. Python, we learned, some of us were like a little familiar with it, but we'd never used it in collaboration with OpenCV to do image processing. In addition, we learned about communication systems and how all the different subsystems work together with systems engineering, and also a little bit of physics, as the Raspberry Pi included circuitry. In addition, we needed to know about the space environment and also CAD as well in order to create our 3D model. We also learned some skills. So first was time management, because each of us had very busy schedules as upperclassmen in high school. And so it was hard for us to all meet together, but we all found time to work on the CubeSat project all together. And we also needed a lot of adaptability because, as you saw, we had some challenges with Bluetooth. We had to figure out if there were alternate methods and what was best for us. So we had to adapt in a lot of senses, and our final product was a lot different from what we initially imagined.
Another main lesson that we learned was communication is very key. It was very useful to have an idea of what everyone was doing on their smaller projects when it came time to integrate all the different systems, and it better helped us to have a smoother timeline for our CubeSat.
Another set of important lessons we learned was involving execution. To start, we didn't have a very straightforward process for testing and going through everything. But as that went on, we got more confident. And other things we got more confident in were some skills like the Audie mentioned, like Python and OpenCV. I don't think that while all of us had some degree of experience with Python, it wasn't something that we used regularly or very comfortable with, but by the end of this challenge, we felt very comfortable using it and felt like we really understood a lot of the systems that at first seemed kind of mysterious.
So thank you for your time. We're very grateful for this opportunity and for everyone who brought this program together and provided guidance to us when we were struggling a little bit. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Great job, C-Force. I wanted to ask you a question about the image processing. If you had more time to work on it, how would you calibrate for changing lighting conditions?
I would think we take a certain range of difference. We'd try and consider like a certain ranges being the same color in order to avoid like the difficulty with shadows. But of course that is a little bit difficult because if something was a little bit deeper in the water, it might be taken as a shadow.
Great, thank you.
I have one quick question. If you were to scale this to a real satellite, you name two big things you would do.
If I were to scale it to an actual satellite, name two things I would do. Probably one of the things that we listed in our slide. Maybe if we had room, we would add another instrument. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you, Team C-Force. And congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge.
Thank you.
On deck, we have Team Carmel SWENext. But now, please welcome the Midnight Mechanics.
So hello, my name is Emily Pantavla, and I'm a senior at the Presco UCSD.
My name is Angela Perez, and I'm also a senior at the Presco UCSD.
My name is Daniela Navarrete, and I'm also a senior at the Presco UCSD.
And we're the Midnight Mechanics. So to start off, we have our count-up sequence. We want our CubeSat to first determine where it is in space, and to have a correct orientation so that's looking at the Earth. And once it is in the correct position, it will take a low-res image of it so that it can run a code very quickly to make sure that it is over the ocean rather than land, as our mission is to identify and find plastic waste in the ocean. And it will take a photo if the CubeSat is over the ocean, and it will take a high-res image of it. The image will be scanned by the CubeSat with a code, and it is to calculate where the debris is, if applicable, in the photo. And this information will be transmitted to the ground station and will repeat. Our prototype consists of CubeSat mounted onto a GoPro stand attached to a sliding board as a way to simulate orbit in space, and the blue paper represents the ocean, and the green and brown paper underneath represents the land. For our final prototype, we distinguish land from the ocean through color identification, which we did successfully with the blue and green paper. We have a code that runs through the average color of red, green, and blue, and we have a range of blue from 155 to 175, you can see my mouse, to make sure that there's enough blue values to make sure that the CubeSat is over the ocean. And when it falls through this range, it will take a picture, and it won't if the average blue value of the image doesn't fall through the range. And we have a video demonstration of this, although it's a bit hard to see. But we scan green and brown paper, and then CubeSat doesn't take a photo, and you can't see it clearly in the video. We have it on the left side image, on the left side corner, where it says not over ocean, don't take photo. And when it came to the blue paper, it says over ocean, take photo.
Yes, so exactly as Emily mentioned, we were able to successfully use OpenCV to scan the RGB scale. And for our prototype, we used the blue value of blue paper, which was approximately 169. And then the blue average for ocean water is 155 to 175, which was what we considered over ocean to take a picture. So after the image is scanned, the pixel value of the debris will be returned in the form of an array. We decided that we would calculate the coordinates of a single pixel taken in the middle of the array instead of all of the pixel values. And all of the pixel values that are considered to be debris will put in an array titled out of range. And as previously mentioned, we've created a code that will help us sift through all the data to maximize efficiency instead of sending pictures of empty ocean or unhelpful data. So we plan to send exact coordinates and image pixels down to the ground station to identify exact patches of plastic debris. Unfortunately, we did not have the opportunity to complete testing and linking down to the ground station.
So as far as optics go, we know that a smaller lens takes better pictures at a close range and has a wide field of view, while a bigger lens takes pictures at a longer range and has a smaller field of view. So this is where our prototype would be a little bit limited because for the actual CubeSat, we would need something with a bigger lens. And we also calculated that with the system, the CubeSat would take a picture about every 3 seconds, but we ran out of time to get our picture and color detection code automated. So we weren't able to actually implement this into our prototype. And the photographs that we would take on the actual CubeSat would cover a pretty large area. However, the debris would only be seen in a few pixels, and we would need to determine where in the photograph the debris is located in order to determine where in the actual world the debris is. And we also found that another possible option for this challenge, other than a CubeSat, would be a high altitude solar aircraft, which has long duration steerable flights and is capable of taking higher resolution photos. So one of the things that we learned was about the software complexity and difficulty of this challenge. So some of us had a little bit of background in Python already, but for some of us, it was a completely new concept. So that's something that we really had to take time to learn. And it's something that we probably would have taken more time to learn if we had more time.
Well, time management was also a huge lesson we learned as well, because troubleshooting takes a lot of time. And as what Daniela said before, we were new at Python. Like some of us didn't know what Python was or how to navigate it. So every code we ran didn't smoothly run, and there was a lot of fixing that needed to be done as we were not experts. And to apply this to our flight mission, we hope that a bunch of time is reserved for the mission as to allow the coder and builder to prepare and plan. But a good thing was that we learned to document our process. We learned that along the way, we would face issues at different intervals of the project. And so we kept a sheet of resources that we documented so that we could quickly recall to that. And in a timely manner, we could fix our issue. And it was very important because not all of us could work together since we had different classes. And sometimes we'd work on the same task without realizing, which made us waste time. So that's why we had a document that we put or we wrote into each state of what we did. And we can do the same for our flight mission to communicate with team members and hopefully save time to prevent them from working on the same task that was already done.
So as a team, we all struggled with priority management because like Emily said, there were communication issues because of scheduling differences. So for example, we did become like fixated on our color detection to work. And as a result, we overlooked the IMU and we were unable to get it to work. As far as personal commitment, however, we started relatively late in the year, and because our team is all senior girls, it was sort of difficult to integrate it to our already established weekly routines, but we made it work. And we'd like to thank everyone for this opportunity, as well as Mr. Rupert, who really provided all the moral support and logistics support that we needed. And now we will open up to any questions.
I have a question. Hi. So I understand that you weren't able to get the downlink to work. And I understand why. You only got a team of 3 and you had a lot of scheduling conflicts, and I'm impressed that you made it as far as you did. Do you have a sense for what the accuracy rate would have been using the plastic identification methods had you been able to do the downlink?
No, as far as an exact number, we weren't able to really get into like the details.
Okay.
But unfortunately, so you mentioned it wasn't us 3 only. There's more of us, and unfortunately, our partner who did that, she's not able to be with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, what's the biggest challenge you came across?
I think the biggest challenge was working together because, as I said before, we have 2 different classes where some of us were in a different class and one of us were in the same class, and we couldn't work together or meet in the same day. And that made it hard because we would waste time or, working on the same task and not working on the task that we needed to do. So we just didn't have time or have a complete objective of what to do.
So I feel like it was a bit of like the instruments we were provided, because we sort of set expectations for ourselves, but then like we realized like the camera wouldn't like realistically work. And then we like went through the process of like comparing how our prototype CubeSat works in comparison to how an actual CubeSat would work, like an actual in-flight satellite. And yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Team Midnight Mechanics, and congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. On deck, we have Team Narvi, but now please welcome Team Carmel SWENext.
Hello, we are Team Carmel SWENext. My name is Geetika.
I'm Raghav. I'm Luca.
And also on our team are Sonakshi and Hannah, who could not be here with us today. So starting off with our final system overview, our CubeSat was comprised of acrylic panels and an aluminum frame for our structure, which held the other components of our CubeSat, such as the solar panel and the power bank, which powered our CubeSat, the camera, which took pictures, the IMU, which worked as our ADCS subsystem, and the Raspberry Pi, which undertook the functions of the CubeSat and sent and received signals. So a timeline of how our CubeSat functions is first an SSH connection is established between the CubeSat and the ground station, and this is how signals are sent and received. And so first the ground station sends a signal, which is in the form of a program, to the CubeSat. And this program tells the Pi to take a picture. So the Pi will tell the camera every 10 seconds to take a picture. And once a picture is taken, it is sent back to the ground station where image processing occurs. So now we're going to discuss some of the results and testing from our final demo. So the way we made a demo of the CubeSat over the ocean is by using blue paper to represent the ocean, and then using various plastic items to represent colored plastic that could be found in the ocean. And here you can see a picture of our setup. So how we undertook our demo was by first powering the CubeSat on, and then we sent the signal to the CubeSat to run the program, where it took images at an interval of 10 seconds for the duration of our demo. And after images were taken, they were sent back to the ground station, where the images were processed to be able to identify the colored plastic in the images. So here you can see on the left an example of an image that was taken by the CubeSat, and then on the right, a picture of the program that was used to process these images. So some sources of error that we ran into were first about blue plastics. So blue plastics, because they're so similar in color to the background of the blue paper, it was hard for image processing programs to pick up the blue plastics in the presence of these blue plastics. And if we had more time, we would work on being able to adjusting our program to be able to identify the blue plastics, as well as also being able to report back on the size of the plastics and the location of the plastics that we find. And so now Raghav's going to talk about how we're going to scale the successes that we had to an actual flight spacecraft.
Thanks, Kitika. So just like any prototype, we kind of realized that there was going to be some changes that needs to be made in order to ensure a proper final mission. And so we split that up into upgrades to materials and upgrades to software. So when it comes to our materials, we realized that we needed to have some more durable and lightweight materials to resist spatial forces. So instead of using acrylic, if we could replace those with more durable and lightweight materials, such as aluminum and titanium, this would help, this would greatly improve our CubeSat, as it would reduce the amount of outgassing that occurs when our CubeSat is eventually launched. Additionally, we intend on using larger and more efficient solar panels to meet the power requirements of the mission. And finally, coupling our camera system with a more powerful and larger lens so that we have higher resolution photos, as well as implementing an infrared or radar system to complement our already established camera system, so that we can have photos that are higher resolution, which will in turn increase the accuracy of our plastic detection software. And then when it comes to software upgrades, we hope to implement an artificially intelligent neural network that can improve the accuracy of detecting plastic patterns in the ocean. And so the way that this would work is that it would take photos of ocean water, and then from there, the neural network would be able to identify images where plastic is present. Because as we saw in our tech demo, our tech demo had showed ocean water where plastic is present. However, that's not necessarily representative of the complete ocean, right? Because some areas of the ocean are going to have plastic while others don't. And so by implementing a neural network, we can save processing power by having that initial filter that says this image is just ocean water, it does not have any plastics, and then this image does have plastics. And then from there, we can do the image processing to identify exactly the specific locations of the plastic. And so that goes on to our second point, where we would like to gather data on the amount of and type of plastic detected, and then report those coordinates in time to the ground station so that there's proper directions and instructions that can be relayed to cleanup crews. So now I will turn it over to Luca, who will talk about some of the lessons we learned throughout this process.
Yeah, so like Raghav said, there are many lessons that we learned throughout this whole entire CubeSat journey. And the first lesson that we really learned was that we must perfect each individual component for each of the systems before actually combining it all together. And this was really shown through an example of us really working on the Bluetooth component, but the Bluetooth component as a whole didn't really work for the overall communication system. And because of this, this really led to us not really perfecting the communication system to actually affect the overall CubeSat system. So this really leads to my second point that we really learned throughout this whole entire process, which was establishing more backup plans. So the backup plan to the example of us unable to using the Bluetooth system was actually using the SSH, which actually had Wi-Fi. So by using the SSH as a backup plan, we were able to perfect the individual component of communication. And because of that, we were able to overall do the CubeSat mission through the perfection of replacing the Bluetooth system with the SSH that uses the Wi-Fi. And for the third bullet points for the lessons that we've learned is really asking for assistance from mentors and coaches. So thank you, Dr. Wayne, for helping us as a mentor. And by asking many of these mentors and coaches on coding help, on the hardware help, and on the communication system help, we were able to actually understand more about how each individual component really played into how the overall CubeSat worked and how it really contributes to the mission as a whole. So asking for assistance was really a key lesson that we really learned as a whole. And the fourth bullet point is really keeping notes of the errors throughout the whole entire process. So we've essentially kept notes through Google Docs and on paper on what specific errors occurred in the code, what specific errors occurred in our communication, and what are we doing wrong with the hardware. By keeping notes with all of these, we were able to talk to the mentors, and we were also able to look at what we got wrong through the errors so that we could actually solve the key problem within the errors that were being shown. And this is really a key lesson that we learned because it really impacted us and made us more efficient in the long run. And the last was time management. As a whole, our group really worked more on the code and a bit less on the hardware. And this is really a lesson learned, as by dividing time more, we could have been even more efficient. While we were still really efficient, time management was really a key lesson that we learned through the hardware and the coding. And for future CubeSat missions in which we apply the lessons learned into, the first bullet point would be recording the sources of error each time you run the mission. So this is really important, as through the sources of error, we as a whole group really learned what was the source of the problem. And this is, I feel like, a really key point that really should be put into future CubeSat missions from what we learned. The second one was applying to more of the source code, where it shows the possibility of utilizing the image processing algorithms. So through our CubeSat journey, we were able to find that image processing algorithms were really efficient for identifying the plastics for the overall mission. And that's why this could be used for potential future CubeSat missions related to identifying the plastics in the ocean. And arguably the most important point is really working as a team. As working as a team through our total CubeSat mission and throughout the whole journey, we were really able to identify our goal of identifying the plastics in the ocean through our CubeSat.
So we'd like to finish off by thanking everybody who made our journey possible, starting off with Dr. Wang, who was our mentor and was able to guide us through a lot of the difficulties we had throughout the challenge. And then also we want to thank our team coach, Lahiri Chituri, for her guidance and how she assisted us throughout the challenge as well. And lastly, but definitely not least, we'd like to thank the BeaverWorks Institute and the Lincoln Laboratory and MIT for being able to provide us with this opportunity to take on this challenge. We all learned a lot about CubeSats and all related subject matters. And so thank you to everybody who made this possible.
And then I would like to make one special acknowledgement to one of our team members, Gitika. Today's her birthday, and she's really the one who spearheaded this initiative across our school. So we would just like to thank her and wish her a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, Raga.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Thank
birthday.
you. Thank you.
So a quick question for me. You mentioned that you didn't always have time to test out the individual modules before you did the system integration. What kind of problems did you run into when you try to do the system integration early like that?
So one problem that we definitely ran into was establishing the communications between the hardware and the software, making sure that the connection works. So when we originally tried the components individually, a Bluetooth connection did work, but then when we try to integrate the hardware with the software, the Bluetooth integration and transferring the images over Bluetooth, we had a lot of difficulty with that. So that's when we ended up switching to an SSH connection.
Thank you.
Yeah, the team learned a lot from both online material and hands-on projects. So can you pick up one biggest learning for the whole program?
I think one of the biggest things we learned was how to work together. We've all done team projects in the past, but this was like a really big undertaking where we all had to learn a lot, and we all had to be. None of us had really had much hardware experience before, but through working together and meeting before school and after school as much as possible, we learned how to help support each other and work with each other on our own journeys and as our journey together with this challenge.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. And thank you, Carmel SWENext, and congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. On deck, we have Team Aveng-Hers, but now please welcome Team Narvi.
Hi, we're Team Narvi. I'm Meryl.
I'm Navia.
I'm Harshini.
I'm Garima.
And I'm Nandana, and here is our final presentation.
So for our final systems review, what we have is that the ground station sends a signal to the CubeSat to start detecting plastics. Once the mission starts, the CubeSat takes 10 images in total with a 3-second interval in between each image. These images are sent to the ground station, which processes these images and puts a red square around the plastics detected. All the images collected that have plastics are uploaded to GitHub, and the ones without are discarded. Our CubeSat was able to successfully identify when there were no plastics in the image and when there were multiple pieces. This is how it addresses our mission, by analyzing the images and correctly identifying plastic. We tested using a dark background and lighter plastic, since this is how we could best mimic the ocean. And we also had images with no plastics that would resemble portions of the ocean where there is nothing to detect.
Our results. Our CubeSat was able to successfully complete its objective of identifying and detecting pieces of plastic against our purple background. Our CubeSat determined the plastic and discarded unnecessary images. These unnecessary images were when the CubeSat took pictures of just the purple background to represent how some parts of the ocean do not have any trash in them, like Navia previously mentioned. These images were then uploaded to GitHub without any errors, and the CubeSat was able to estimate the size of each piece of the plastic depending on the given height. One thing that we had to change from our CAD model was that we used a power bank instead of a solar panel to power the CubeSat, because we were testing indoors, so it was unreasonable to be using the solar panel. Our CubeSat had a generally accurate detection, except for the fact that our CubeSat sometimes had a hard time detecting small pieces of plastic. Meryl will go over this in the next couple of slides.
So on to our sources of error. One of the main things we noticed when we looked at our results from our tech demo was that the larger plastics we tested typically struggled with edge detection issues that a more sophisticated algorithm could have accounted for. Another problem we noticed was motion or moving the CubeSat during images, since it was handheld during our testing. That generally affected the quality of the images and therefore the detection. And something we noticed early on in our early testing stages were the IMU orientation readings that were somewhat inconsistent and which contributed to our reasoning for not using them in the final tech demo. So here are some of the results from our tests. As you can see, our object detection was fairly accurate and we were able to successfully identify all the pieces of plastic. However, some of the more ambiguously shaped objects like the plastic wrapped or the more transparent objects had a hard time having their full edge detection coming through. As for some of our different objects like the large plastic folders, the edge detection was completely off, and even though the object itself was detected, the algorithm struggled to actually understand the size and the bounding box of the object. However, we were able to successfully identify small pieces of plastic without having them confused for noise in the background. This is a closer look at one of the ways we identified objects in our initial stages of our image processing. First, we would blur and grayscale the image to get rid of most of the noise. And then we would increase the thresholding to actually set apart the outlines. And one thing we accounted for the differences in light and light variation in our images, we switched to adaptive thresholding, which would allow us to ensure that our thresholding worked across the image regardless of changes in lighting throughout the actual image. And then after, the algorithm would go over these outlines and then actually detect images while discarding all these small instances of background noise.
So one of the major issues we ran into while making the prototype for our CubeSat was with hardware. Our acrylic panels had holes that didn't always line up with the adjacent panels and screws that wouldn't always fit into the holes that were created for us. To work around these challenges, we had to think outside of the box. This included using a drill press to drill in new holes where we needed them, and at times using the Velcro provided to keep some of the panels in place. Obviously, the learning curve didn't end with our physical materials. We spent many days in the last few months unable to make significant progress simply because something changed within our code. And many times this was due to corrupted files or the Raspberry Pi not connecting with our laptops. Fortunately, we learned a lot in the process of troubleshooting with the help of many Stack Overflow pages. And as with many things, the theoretical design, it always seems a lot less complex until you put them into practice. So our CubeSat design was definitely no exception. We learned how important it is to plan exactly where components go to reduce hardware complications after multiple instances where we screwed in one of our panels only to realize that the cutout for the wiring space was on the wrong side, or that the panels didn't perfectly line up on the brackets. And all things considered, the last but certainly not least lesson we learned was about planning and estimating how long tasks will take. After this experience, I speak for all 5 of us when I say we've realized the importance of overestimating. There were a couple deadlines in which we were definitely rather rushed since we didn't account for all of the aforementioned issues. So that's definitely a lesson we can take away from this project and apply it to many aspects of our lives, as deadlines aren't unique to this challenge. And more than that, these are lessons that can be applied to future flight missions as well.
If we were to scale our CubeSat to the size of a real satellite, we would have to make several improvements and additions. First, we would like to create a more secure casing for the payload. Currently, we're using acrylic panels, and we actually removed a few of them in order to access the Raspberry Pi inside when we needed to. This wouldn't work in a real CubeSat, so we need to find a more permanent casing than acrylic, one that can fit all of the electronics and the wires on board. We would also like to use a higher resolution camera. Currently, our camera has trouble detecting smaller pieces of plastic, even from a testing height of about 3 to 4 feet. So this would not work in the case of a real CubeSat, and we would need a camera with slightly higher resolution than this. We would also like to distribute our weight within the CubeSat more symmetrically. Currently, our power bank, which is our heaviest component by far, is at one corner of the CubeSat, and this probably wouldn't be stable if the CubeSat were to be launched. So we would need to find a way to keep this component in specific closer to the center of mass. And we would also like to create a more intelligent object detection algorithm. Currently, our algorithm just detects objects based on light value and RGB, and it uploads to GitHub if an object is detected. But this means that it's just detecting objects and not necessarily plastic. It would be possible, if possible, it would be nice to discard images that included islands and boats instead of just doing this part manually. We'd also need to create several additions. First, we would like to implement our solar panels. On our prototype, the solar panels are in the location that they would be on a real CubeSat opposite to the camera, but it's not hooked up since for testing purposes, we decided to power our CubeSat using the power bank. So during an actual launch of the CubeSat, we would need to wire the solar panel in properly and make sure that the solar panel can actually power all the electronics on board. We would also like to implement coordinate mapping to identify the location of any plastics detected on Earth and use radio signals to communicate with the CubeSat instead of Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, which is what we use during testing purposes. Thank you so much for providing us the opportunity to be a part of this challenge. We'd like to also thank our mentor who guided us through this process and our physics teacher, Mr. Shockley, who is one of our biggest resources during our process of completing this. And finally, thank you for listening.
Question. I'm curious about your detection rate. You mentioned that you were able to detect most all of the plastics. Do you have a number associated with that?
If I was to estimate it, I'd say it's around 80% depending on the plastics that we used. Obviously for all the plastics that were not the large folders, which was a struggle, it was 100%. So it just really depends on the types of plastics that we used.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you are going to scale it up to a flight spacecraft, you pick one thing. What is the one thing?
I think the one thing would probably be to refine our algorithm a little bit more. Currently, if we were to send this algorithm to space, I don't think it would actually be very useful seeing as it's just detecting objects. So that's definitely something that we would need to do before we even consider launching it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Team Narvi, and congratulations on completing the Build the CubeSat challenge. On deck, we have Team CubeCats. But now, please welcome the Aveng-Hers.
Final event presentation. Hey, we're the Avengers, and we are Anya, Callan, Nivi, Prishet, Sadhana, and Unity. We've really enjoyed working on this project and hope you enjoy this slideshow we've put together. So here's kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about in this slideshow. So first, we're going to be talking describing the CubeSat system, and then we'll be talking about the tech demo, and then scaling the CubeSat to a flight spacecraft, and then lastly, we'll be talking about the lessons we have learned. So the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson said, "We're all connected to each other biologically, to the Earth chemically, to the universe atomically. This tells us that this is our planet and that we should take care of it, which we are hoping to achieve with the project of cleaning plastic."
Final systems overview. This talks about how our system works and how it applies to the mission. The CubeSat begins with the launch and alternates between taking low or high resolution pictures during an orbit. It takes pictures for half the time and sleeps during the dark zone. After a low-res orbit, pictures are sent to the ground station, which uses image processing techniques that removes all of the blue, which is the ocean color in the image background, and detects the other colors to be plastic. Then, filters work to determine what's actually plastic and should be taken again in the high-resolution orbit. All in all, the implementations we've come up with save energy and storage through the different orbits, as well as detect plastics accurately in multiple images taken by the CubeSat. This slide shows some of the steps that go through the image processing and how it filters out what's actually plastic.
So the connection to the actual mission. So to detect plastic, our CubeSat will use image processing to look for anything standing out in the ocean and label it as plastic. It'll then relay this info back to the ground station, which could send this to teams to go in to clean the ocean, to governments for stats, etc. For our creative element, we added in additional orbits to make our CubeSat switch between low resolution and high resolution photos to make the most of our CubeSat storage space. We've also modeled our demo setup to mimic the ocean's background as well as take pictures of actual plastics.
Now, for test results. These are our discoveries through experimentation and our happy little accidents. Our first main error before the demo video was with our Bluetooth, which we had to restart the Pi and its Bluetooth module quite a lot in order to sustain a connection between the Pi and the ground station. Our second bump in the road, wait, are there even roads in space? Anyways, we had trouble with
with certain names of files refusing to transfer, along with the statistics that we garnered from our pictures. Finally, the Adafruit camera was very unfocused. Just like a few of our group members at times, I'm not naming any names, we had to adjust its focus manually on the camera's frame in order to get the camera to take its clearest pictures. Unfortunately, we still had a problem with the imaging code differentiating from our actual plastics and the reflection of our tarp, which we used to mimic the ocean. Now, onto our results. Our satellite was able to orbit easily with enough space between it and the ocean, which our tarp with the plastics imitated flawlessly. The tarp helped again mimic the ocean and contributed to accurate stats of how much plastics we had in it. Luckily, after a lot of testing, the file transfer and the Bluetooth were cooperative. The flight software successfully took photos every 5 seconds before entering a sleep mode in the dark zone for 30 seconds. Finally, one of our most neglected yet important parts was our power supply, which was able to sustain the power for the Pi in order to operate throughout the whole demo. As you can see, here are a few screenshots from our demo. In our first picture, we have a picture of a part of our code that takes the pictures based on 5-second intervals. In the second and the third picture, we have another screenshot of our setup and our code running and transferring files via Bluetooth. And finally, we have a picture of our imaging code.
The imaging and the flight software, both consisting of code, provides a simulation to an actual CubeSat orbit. It accounts for aspects like saving power through time periods of inactivity and having the Pi run the code for plastic stats in the pictures taken. The blue tarp background with real plastics on it also mimics what an actual CubeSat would see. The power subsystem also dictates the CubeSat's performance by operating based on how much power it has, whether it be solar energy in space or energy stored in the battery. Finally, the Bluetooth subsystem applies to the importance of the mission as well, mimicking the CubeSat's wireless file transfer to and from space.
Scaling to a flight spacecraft. Here we'll be discussing how we would change our CubeSat if it were to actually go into space. One of the main things we'd have to do is change the intervals for taking the photos. We originally used time intervals and IMU values, which were unreliable, but that wouldn't be as applicable in space, so we'd have to insert a GPS module. This would tell the CubeSat when to take pictures, the location of plastics, send data to a visual map, and find the correct place to transfer files to the ground station and transfer automatically. We plan to also increase the orbits to 10, with different stages of each orbit. We'd start off with orbit 1, where low-resolution pictures would be taken and sent to the ground station for processing, and then do the same in orbit 2. Starting off with low-resolution pictures to find areas concentrated in plastics before taking storage-heavy high-resolution photos makes sure we don't run outer space. While orbit 2's pics are processing, the pictures from orbit 1 would be sent to the CubeSat, which would take high-resolution pictures of places with plastics and send them back down. The same thing would happen with orbit 2's picture, and then this would continue till 10 orbits are reached. It would be important to change the imaging process by training the CubeSat to recognize plastic through machine learning and detecting them with edge detection. Lastly, the actual CubeSat would need to be able to withstand cold temperatures, so we need something more durable or to have panels with insulation. The panels would also need to be reinstated with ones with less unnecessary holes.
Lessons learned. There were a lot of key takeaways from our CubeSat building process. First, we realized we needed to plan the layout of the CubeSat before assembling, because we'd run out of hinges and holes on our first attempt. And we had to rethink where to secure the power bank, the Raspberry Pi, and the Pi camera safely. Then, like Callan said, the IMU wasn't the best option for capturing coordinates. It was as unreliable as that one kid who forgets to bring in the group project the day it's due. Thanks a lot, Timothy. But instead of using the IMU, it was better to segment sectors in our testing space and assign each picture to a sector. But when scaled up, we would use GPS modules instead. Another thing was to fix a place for testing early on, since re-establishing connections at a new location caused issues. Talking about re-establishing connection, We realized it was easier to reboot specific modules than the whole pie, since that caused more problems than it solved. We learned that coordination and teamwork are really important, as well as effective planning, especially being in different schools over 40 minutes away. Finally, our most important lesson of all is that late night cold pizzas always taste better eating it with your amazing teammates. Pseudo pip pip hooray!
Okay, thank you for that presentation. I have a quick question for you. You mentioned a technique where you took a low resolution image using the camera. What technique did you use to get it to shoot low res?
So there's a certain line that changes the resolution of an image in the code. And we just altered that to take a low resolution picture this time and then a high resolution picture another.
We could tell that it was low resolution and high resolution because during the Bluetooth transfer, the size of the image actually changed from like a couple kilobytes to a megabyte, and it took longer to transfer that way.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. If given more time, what would you do to improve your testing results?
A part that we would change would be the imaging process for sure, because right now it only detects through color, but color is very limited. So when we scale it up to space, we would change that to include moving plastics and distinguish between land and other objects.
Thank you.
We also want to take the location of the pollution identified in the ocean and put it on a coordinate somewhere on Google Maps, because that allows teams to recognize where is there pollution in the world and helps them send a ship or something to clean it up.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Aveng-Hers, and congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. What did I miss? On deck, we have Lady Lion steamers. But now, please welcome Team CubeCats.
Hello, everyone. We're the CubeCats. I'm Ahil Ali.
I'm Stephen Cow.
I'm Rima Daver.
I'm Swetha Ganesh.
And I'm Sabrina Wang, and welcome to our final event presentation. We are a team from Whitney High School in Cerritos, California. We come from a variety of backgrounds, but share a common goal of working to improve the world around us by promoting accessibility and diversity in technology. We would like to first thank our mentors, Gary Freeman, Robert Miller, and Shannon Statham, for supporting us through the challenge, and the team at BWSI and SWE for making it all possible.
So our mission is to aid Dr. Colin Ward in removing large plastic debris from the ocean. And we address this challenge by developing a CubeSat that can take pictures of a water environment and then identify the plastic in those images. And so our team actually automated the plastic detection process by training our own machine learning model.
Here's our final system overview. Our CubeSat structure is composed of 6 acrylic side panels secured to 4 aluminum side brackets with screws. The IMU, Raspberry Pi camera, and Raspberry Pi are attached to the bottom panel and supported by nylon standoffs. The battery pack is attached to the top panel with Velcro. We did not include the solar panel because it does not generate enough power for our CubeSat to be self-sufficient.
Our CubeSat software system takes pictures and identifies the plastic in those pictures. The inertial measurement unit, or IMU, first measures the orientation and acceleration of the CubeSat. The orientation must be facing downwards as indicated by the roll and pitch, with a margin of error of no more than 30 degrees for each. The horizontal acceleration must be below 0.5 meters per second squared to avoid taking blurry images. Once these thresholds are met, the Raspberry Pi camera takes a picture. The picture is then sent through the machine learning model, which identifies the plastic in the picture with the bounding box. We developed a machine learning model using TensorFlow and ImageAI's object recognition algorithm and trained it using our own custom-made dataset, which we'll go into greater detail on later. Since there is room for error, if the model is at least 50% confident that plastic is present in the picture, then the picture will be saved on the SD card to later be downlinked to the ground station for further analysis.
our tech demo, we simulated an ocean environment with blue paper as the background and placed various pieces of plastic from our daily life to act as plastic waste in the ocean. We moved the CubeSat horizontally above the demo setup to simulate the CubeSat's orbit in space. The CubeSat took pictures every 5 seconds, given that the acceleration and orientation thresholds were met, and identified the plastic in the pictures. The CubeSat then used Bluetooth to download the images with plastic identified to the ground station.
When training our machine learning model, we split our data into the standard 80-20 ratio of training data to testing data. Our machine learning model learned from the training data and achieved a 70% accuracy on the testing data. The results from our testing show that the CubeSat is able to reliably identify and box the general location of plastic in an image. As you can see from these images, the CubeSat was able to identify plastic regardless of its location in the image or orientation.
However, there were still some cases where the CubeSat wasn't able to correctly identify the plastic. Two of the main issues were that the CubeSat either identified only one part of the plastic or a dark shadow casted by the background, and possible sources of error include that this can be attributed to include opaque object outlines, especially with things such as plastic bags or similar colors to the background, which made the plastic blend in.
For a flight spacecraft, many features would need to be upgraded. First, we would need a stronger camera capable of taking clear pictures from more than 400 kilometers away. Our Raspberry Pi camera has a pixel size of 1.12 micrometers by 1.12 micrometers, while satellites such as NASA's Landsat takes pictures at a 15 meter by 15 meter resolution. We would also need a larger solar panel as our CubeSat currently relies upon a battery which would be difficult to recharge in space. From our power budget, we calculated that our solar panel would need to be at least 27 times as large as the one we were provided in order for our CubeSat to be self-sufficient. We would also have to establish a different protocol for communication for a space mission. In order for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to function, the ground station and CubeSat can only be between 10 to 100 meters apart, making it impractical for a space mission. In order to communicate to our CubeSat in space, we would modulate a carrier radio wave to include extra data and have a small antenna on the CubeSat transmit this carrier wave. At the ground station, we could receive this modulated wave with a different antenna and demodulate the wave and compensate for the Doppler effect in order to isolate the information the CubeSat transmitted.
We would also need a more powerful data processor and larger data storage. Our CubeSat currently uses a Raspberry Pi, which takes around 5 seconds to process an image and has 16 gigabytes of storage. This would be infeasible for a real mission where the CubeSat would take many pictures per second and store thousands of pictures. Our CubeSat would also need a stronger physical structure for a spaceflight to withstand the pressure and temperature from launch and a space environment. We'd most likely need to refit our acrylic panels with aluminum panels, which are used for satellites. Our CubeSat would also require thermal regulation so that its components continue to function in the negative 270 degrees Celsius temperature of space. We would need heaters and radiators to maintain an optimal operating temperature and could model this heat distribution using a heat software map. Finally, we would need to upgrade the CubeSat's attitude determination and control system. Our CubeSat currently uses an IMU, but current satellites use a variety of additional sensors, including GPS, a sun sensor, an earth sensor, and a star tracker.
Over the course of this challenge, we learned many lessons. As a team, we came together with different skill sets and developed our collaboration and communication skills. Some of us had more experience with hardware and others with software. We learned to play to our strengths when dividing work and to maintain regular and clear communication among the team. But we also had the opportunity to learn from each other. Those of us who were less familiar with hardware learned from those who were, and vice versa for software. We learned that it was nice to be a specialist, but valuable as well to be a generalist. We also came together with different schedules. We learned just how important it was to develop a flexible project timeline that left room to address unforeseen challenges or delays. We also learned to adapt to technical challenges by being flexible. Some of the holes in the panels did not align, so we drilled additional holes and managed to secure the panels with fewer screws. We ran into issues with Bluetooth communication between the Raspberry Pi and Windows computer, so we migrated to a Mac computer and got it working.
We also learned to integrate and test our CubeSat part by part to easily identify issues and the component that was the source of the issues. One of the biggest lessons that we learned was that data preparation is incredibly time-consuming. To train our machine learning model, we needed a large data set of plastic images. Since the Raspberry Pi camera produced images with a pinkish tint, we needed to create our own data set of plastic images in order to mimic what the model would see during emission. We spent several hours taking over 200 images of plastic using our demo setup and the Raspberry Pi camera. We then spent several more hours labeling the plastic in the images so it could be used to train the model. We also learned that it was important to test our CubeSat in a variety of conditions to mimic the unpredictability of the real world. We tackled this by testing our CubeSat on a variety of plastics in different lighting conditions.
So that concludes our presentation. The Build a CubeSat Challenge has been such a unique and enjoyable learning experience for our team. We have learned not only how to build a CubeSat, but also the design, the development, and the testing processes that are used in the real world to create technologies such as satellites that honestly have such a potential to change the world. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a quick question for you. You mentioned you used TensorFlow for the image analysis. Why did you choose that package?
Well, we chose TensorFlow because we were working with Python, and TensorFlow is probably one of the best machine learning libraries for Python. And for image recognition model, we used something called Image AI, which is compatible with TensorFlow.
Thank you.
Yeah, what's the biggest challenge you came across throughout the program?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that we did come across was that not everyone's schedules wouldn't always align up well. During this past month, we also had AP testing, so that also added a lot of stress to our schedule, but we did manage to come together and get this all working.
Yeah. How about a technical perspective? What's the major challenge? The biggest one?
I would say we struggled with Bluetooth communication. We tried to get it working on a Windows computer and it just wasn't working. But then we tried on a Mac and we had to try multiple times even with that, but we were able to get there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CubeCats. And congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. On deck, we have Team Astra. But now, please welcome the Lady Lion Steamers.
Hi everyone, we are the Lady Lion Steamers from Westminster High School. I'm Emily.
I'm
Nhi.
I'm Quinn.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Vicky.
And today we'll be presenting our final project for the Build a CubeSat challenge. So the topics that we'll be discussing in this presentation are system overview, demo results, scaling to a flight spacecraft, and the lessons we learned from this challenge.
All right, so first we will go over the layout of our design. For this challenge, our mission was to detect colored plastics in the ocean from space, and our goals were to create a realistic and durable prototype, determine how to differentiate colored plastics from the background, and get our CubeSat to take pictures at certain time intervals and send them to our ground station. For our block diagram, we first begin with our solar panel, which we discovered doesn't work. However, it charges the power bank, and they are connected through a USB-A to USB-C cable. From there, we use a USB-A to USB-C cable from the power bank to power the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi is connected to the IMU through jumper cables. The IMU is essentially a gyroscope, which gives us data on acceleration, angular velocity, and temperature. The Raspberry Pi is also connected through a ribbon cable to a Raspberry Pi camera module that will be taking our pictures, which will be processed to look for colored plastic.
Next, we have software architecture. The image shows the order in which I'll be talking about it. Since the image is too small, I'll be talking about each block separately. First, our CubeSat has 3 components: solar panel, power bank, and Raspberry Pi. What the solar panel does is that it powers the power bank, which will then power the Raspberry Pi. which will then power the Raspberry Pi. This process enables the Raspberry Pi to take pictures and rotate based on the IMU's data, where it classifies if it sees colored plastic with the taken pictures. Well, how does the CubeSat take those pictures? We would need to code its function using Python. Git or GitHub will then organize it and download it into the OpenCV library. The OpenCV library is a tool that allows us to identify and process specific images or objects. So in this case, it will process and detect the colored plastics using the Python code. This will lead to 3 different modes that will enable this detection. The imaging mode will take pictures of the plastics in the ocean and transmit them to the analysis mode, where it analyzes and processes the images. Once the analysis is complete, it will transmit to COM mode, where the data will be downlinked to Earth. Basically, the CubeSat's transmitter will modulate and amplify the data. Then the CubeSat's transmit antenna will radiate the signal through a channel, reaching the ground station antenna, which is on Earth. The ground station antenna will then amplify the signals through a low noise amplifier and demodulate it to get back the received data. Once the data is received, it is sent to people who will be using or needing the CubeSat, so scientists and ocean cleanup organizations, where they can locate the plastic from the received data and collect the plastics found or research the effects of the plastics.
All right, so on the left is our CAD model, and on our right is our CubeSat. The structure, we did use the acrylic panels and the screws and X nuts. We scrapped free polycarbonate from our first robotics team and decided to use it and hold up our power bank. Since we felt acrylic in the middle of the acrylic, we decided to utilize these to make a shelf using L brackets and polycarb, which, as I mentioned before, holds up the battery. Also, in order for the battery to stay on the polycarb, we stabilized the cube to the acrylic side panels, which are placed on top of each at the bottom. Camera at the CubeSat space connected IMU. The solar panel sits at the top, which it with being the only thing outside the acrylic paneling.
Hey, can I interrupt for just a moment? One of you has internet connectivity issues. We couldn't hear most of the narration over the hardware description. Would it be possible for someone else to read that portion of the script so we can hear everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry for those issues. So on our left, as Emily mentioned, we have our CAD model, and then on the right, we have our CubeSat. So we obviously use the acrylic panels and their screws and their hex nuts. And then because of our first robotics team, we have free polycarbonate. So we decided to use that to hold up our power bank since we felt the acrylic paneling couldn't handle the weight very well. And then seeing the holes available in the middle of the acrylic, we decided to utilize these to make like a little shelf using L brackets and polycarb, which I mentioned as before, holds up the battery. And also in order for the battery to stay on the polycarb, we Velcroed the battery and the polycarb, and we stabilized the structure of the CubeSat by screwing corner rails to the acrylic side panels, which are placed at the top and bottom of each acrylic panel. And then at the bottom, we have our Raspberry Pi with the camera at the CubeSat's base and the connected IMU. The solar panel sits at the top, with it being the only thing outside the safety of the acrylic paneling. So some challenges we faced were that the acrylic panels and the brackets and the aluminum corner rails were all misaligned, so we had to drill new holes in order to line everything up. However, sometimes the acrylic would break because it's so fragile, and we had to buy our own screws and nuts since we ran out of certain sizes, and some of the ones that were provided for us were too big for the holes in the aluminum rails. And also, since the code looked for a specific RGB range and the color changed depending on the light, we would constantly have to change the RGB values. And then for our ocean, it needed to be a specific shade of blue, or the code would consider it plastic. So next I'll be talking about our demo results. So how we approached a demo is we laid out a blue blanket and laid out plastics from our school. We would hover the CubeSat above this blanket and slowly move it around as the code outputted whether it saw plastic or not. And then if it did see plastic, the camera would be pushed to GitHub. Or sorry, the picture would be pushed to GitHub. Our code basically works by looking at the picture the camera would take and checking how much a percentage of blue can it see. If it was above 98%, the camera was considered full of water and not committed to GitHub. If it was below 98%, the picture was considered to have plastic in it and it was committed to GitHub. So here's an example. Our IMU outputs data, which would have been used to determine if the camera was facing downwards, but unfortunately it wasn't working. And then the picture would be taken every second. And then as you can see here, the Raspberry Pi determines whether the water is likely in the entire picture. And here it says it's detected with 100%. So for our achievements, we were able to successfully detect and take pictures of colored plastic, have our CubeSat be able to withstand intense shaking, and receive information from our CubeSat to our ground station. For our errors, the solar panel had a low amperage and was unable to power the power bank, and the IMU wasn't showing movement, so we couldn't detect if the CubeSat was facing downward for it to take pictures. And our camera couldn't detect plastics that were transparent.
Next, I'll be discussing how we'd scale a prototype to a flight spacecraft. So our CubeSat would need more durable, higher quality materials rather than acrylic. We'd need larger or more solar panel to power the CubeSat, and we'd also need to increase our CubeSat can make it into space. There would also need to be a long battery life, a high resolution to detect the color plastics better, higher quality IMU.
Let me jump in. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me jump in once again. We got connectivity problems. Having someone else read it worked really well last time. Can we do that now, please?
I can do it. So,
Thank you.
next we will be discussing how we scaled our prototype to a flight spacecraft. So our CubeSat would need to be more durable and have higher quality materials rather than acrylic. We'd also need a larger and more solar panels in order to power the CubeSat. We would also need to increase the power supply so our CubeSat can make it into space, have longer battery life, and a higher resolution camera in order to detect colored plastics better, as well as a higher quality IMU to determine direction better, a propulsion system in order to launch the CubeSat into space as well.
Okay, I'll be going over the lessons we learned throughout the time working in our CubeSat. So we realized that we need to improve communication within our group, working more collaboratively and being more time efficient when it comes to planning ahead of time and spreading out our work instead of trying to cram everything like days before it's due. We also noticed that some members did more work than others and we should have stepped in to help them, which relates to like the splitting the more work evenly. We also should have taken advantage of our office hours and reached out to our mentor more because we often get stuck on a problem that our mentor could have helped us with.
Okay, so thank you so much for listening to our CubeSat final presentation. I'm really sorry a lot of our team had technical difficulties, and we'd like to give a special thanks to our coach, Lee Pham, and our mentor, Alyssa Rose, as well as SWE and Beaver Works for this opportunity. And now we'll be taking questions.
Great, thank you very much. I have one question. If you were to do this again and you wanted to improve the success rate of the recognition, would you take a different approach?
I can answer this question. Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we programmed the CubeSat in terms of detecting if there was plastic or not, like I mentioned, was seeing if there was a certain amount of blue in the picture, but this could definitely bring up problems if there was any transparent bottles or anything like that. So something I would like to pursue maybe next time if we were to do this again was to do like an outline of any plastics that it saw. So not really base it off of the percentage of blue, but seeing if we could put like a box around any plastics that it saw, and I think that would definitely improve the accuracy.
Thank you.
So what's your biggest learning from this whole program?
If someone's speaking, we can't hear.
Yeah, okay.
We still can't hear.
I can take that. So our biggest learning takeaway from this is actually a lot of things. For me personally, I learned a lot about budgets. Before this, I never even knew what all the link and power budgets were. So that was definitely really nice. And also I've learned about the new world of CADing. And so that was really fascinating to me. And I feel that could be really useful for the future if I ever wanted to design a prototype.
Because our other member can't answer because of technical difficulties, I would just like to add from a personal experience, I'd always heard about Raspberry Pis being really cool. My dad encouraged me to try one out, and I was like, no, I'll do it later. But because of this competition, I learned how to SSH into a Raspberry Pi. I learned how to code a Raspberry Pi, how to use an IMU. So I got a lot of hands-on experience with hardware that I don't think I would have been able to get from doing another project like this. And so this was a really cool introduction into space and how satellites work, and definitely learning how to use a Raspberry Pi.
Thank you.
Cool. And thank you, Lady Lions Gamers, and congratulations for completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. On deck, we have Team Lagrange points, but now please welcome Team Astra.
Hello, BWSI teams and judges. I'm Amaya.
I'm Shreya. I'm Shruti.
I'm Samanvi.
And I'm Sanity. Together, we're Team Astra. Here's our final presentation.
Here is an overview of what we will be talking about today. To start off, we have the system level block diagram or overview of our 1U CubeSat. In our diagram here, we have 6 main subsystems. Starting with the structure of our CubeSat, we have an aluminum chassis. For our power, we are using T-core batteries. As a part of the ADCS board, we have our IMU containing the accelerometer, magnetometer, and gyroscope. In our command and data handling system, we have the microprocessor, and in our communication subsystem, we have our Bluetooth interface.
One of the unique aspects of our design is the fact that we use image detection mechanisms on both the ground station as well as the Raspberry Pi. In our design review video, we stated that we would try and implement a reduced precision neural network on the Raspberry Pi. However, this did not work due to numerous reasons, including storage and power that were lacking on the Pi. To work our way around this, we implemented a simple pixel checker algorithm that compared the first pixel in the image to all the other pixels. And if there was a large difference in the values of the pixels, then we counted the image as having important content. Otherwise, we discarded it. This method, however, proved not to be as error resilient as we thought it would be, and therefore we consulted our coaches for help. Through them, we learned how to apply the Sobel edge detection to our code. This method proved to be far more resilient to error. On the ground station, we implemented a neural network YOLO, which we used to detect plastic objects once all images were sent back to the ground station. Another unique aspect of our design to further improve accuracy is the checksum function. When the CubeSat sends an image back to the ground station, along with it comes a text file with a calculated checksum. Once the image is received, the ground station then calculates the checksum for the picture that it received, and only if the checksums match, it will continue with the program. Otherwise, it will keep requesting the satellite for that image until the checksums match.
Here was our computer-aided design, or CAD model from the design review. At the base, we used the FlatSat as inspiration on how to attach the camera, IMU, and Raspberry Pi to the satellite. For the structure, we realized the holes were wrong in the angle brackets, so in the CAD, we created double holes to make sure it aligns. We then use the instructions to create a structure using the newly drilled angle brackets and the polycarbonate pre-cut panels. In our CAD, the power supply is in the center of the CubeSat, so it is easily accessible by all parts of the satellite. However, after building the satellite, we changed the location of it so it could be easily recharged. We placed the plug-in points parallel to a hole in the pre-cut poly panels. Also, after building the CubeSat, as you can see, we used standoffs to stop the power supply from hitting the Raspberry Pi when flipped over, and we used Velcro to secure it to the sides of the CubeSat.
We used the IMU to capture the roll, pitch, and yaw values to collect data about the orientation of our CubeSat. These values were essential for both of our test flights since we relied on the orientation of our CubeSat in order to capture the images with the Raspberry Pi. When we calibrated the Pi, we noticed the yaw values were inaccurate, so we mainly relied on the roll and pitch values for more reliable results and added an error margin to the yaw values. Otherwise, the ADCS system gave us accurate results on taking pictures only when the CubeSat was in the correct orientation. For the link budget, we calculated the estimated values and the experimental values for both test flights. The Wi-Fi Bluetooth chip on the Raspberry Pi via a connection through Bluetooth can recover the data as long as the received power was between negative 89.5 to negative 95.5 decibel milliwatts. And when we did a real-time experiment, we found out that in our first test flight without any barriers, we lost the signal at roughly 25 meters. And in the second test flight with barriers, we lost the connection at around 10 meters.
Our data budget has remained the same since our design review video. Once again, I will emphasize the fact that sending all the pictures back to the ground station first and then analyzing them would take a lot more data and power, as you can see on the right-hand side. However, in our method where we analyze the picture on the satellite and then send it to ground station for further review, it took us only about 10% of the data required because it sends far less images back to the ground station. In terms of our software architecture, not much has changed as well. Our unique design provides flexibility to adjust the ratio between the amount of power consumed by the ground station versus the satellite. As previously stated, we slightly changed our image recognition system on the Pi from a reduced precision neural network to a cell-belt edge detection filter.
On these screenshots at the top of the screen, the first step is our CubeSat powering up, calibrating the camera and IMU, and then in its wait state, waiting for command to start the mission from the ground station. Next, we see the ground station screenshot on the bottom, which is an Ubuntu Linux laptop, initiating the mission with the start command file. At this time, we see the CubeSat starting the mission. During the mission, the CubeSat correctly detects the position using the ADCS subsystem, takes images using the camera subsystem, does lightweight image recognition on the Pi to look for interesting content, and finally successfully transmits images and checksum to the ground station. Finally, the ground station sends the end command file to the mission, and the CubeSat finishes its mission successfully. We now see that the ground station is invoking the deep learning neural network YOLO to classify the images it has received. This network is downloaded and available from the framework called DarkNet. As you will see, we are able to successfully recognize with a high degree of accuracy all of the objects that were captured during the test flight. And here is an actual but speeded up video of a test run that we completed. In this run, we have 5 test objects, a spoon, 2 forks, and 2 bottles. As you can see, I'm moving in the video, and here we are just taking the CubeSat on a run. During the test, I'm moving it in random angles to demonstrate that it's only taking images when in the correct orientation and sending images only when there is content of interest. We also see the screen recording of the software running on the Pi with power up, IMU calibration, mission starting, local image recognition to look for something of interest, image transmission along with checksum, and finally, the mission ending. And now we see the screenshot of the ground station with image recognition results from YOLO Deep Neural Network. As you see, all 5 test objects are recognized, with highest accuracy for our fork being 97% and least accuracy for a bottle being 21%. It was a happy result after a lot of hard work.
Smart requirements change due to scaling to space. For example, the link budget would be completely different as there would be frequencies in different bands. Starting off with the mechanical system, our CubeSat has to be able to withstand harsh conditions in the launching and space atmosphere. In the launching environment, the CubeSat has to be able to maintain the structure and functionality through the acceleration load, vibration, and pressure it has to undergo.
In space, the CubeSat has to accommodate the radiation, but adding an aluminum hull would help protect the exterior of the CubeSat, but the camera would require a sheer material for protection. Our CubeSat would also need a propulsion and motion control system if it were to go to space. For the ADCS system, we would have to make it extremely accurate by including the yaw values, which we decided not to rely on for our CubeSat. It would also be beneficial to add a GPS system on the CubeSat so that we can get an estimated location of the piece of plastic. In the link and power system, a lot of factors would change. If the CubeSat would be going into space, the CubeSat cannot communicate to the ground station via Bluetooth, but rather a high-frequency radio waves. Additionally, the link budget would change since the ground station and CubeSat need to communicate with a larger distance, and there would be more environmental factors like clouds. It is also possible that when the CubeSat is in space, the link between the ground station and the CubeSat is disabled temporarily. In that case, the CubeSat should be able to store the images that it would send to the ground station once the link is fixed. As for power, we would need to consider the thermal aspects and times when the CubeSat won't have direct sunlight for the power budget. In our CubeSat, we did not include the solar panels, which would be crucial if the CubeSat went to space. In the camera and image processing, the camera would have to be stronger as the distance is changed from a couple of meters to kilometers. Additionally, the detection would have to be more precise since not everything captured in a given picture would be plastic. The electronic systems like the Pi processor also need to be able to withstand effects of soft errors caused by cosmic particles.
Throughout this course, we have learned so much. However, here are some of the key points from our experience. Overall, we learned that debugging and integration takes a lot of time. Planning is crucial, and when things don't go according to plan, we should aim to be resilient. In the mechanical subsystem, we learned about the different uses of standoffs and how to correctly tolerance screws don't need nuts. We also learned new ways of using computer-aided design. In the attitude determination control system, we learned about how yaw is the least reliable value, and we used error margin instead. In the link budget and Bluetooth communication subsystem, we learned about how the received power varies based off distance and the different materials of hurdles in the path. We also learned our own method and shared the solution with others on how to transfer files using OBX-FTP. In the camera and image processing subsystem, we learned how to change RGB values to match a neutral setting. We also learned how to implement an outside edge detection algorithm to improve local image processing. In the software architecture subsystem, we learned how to apply neural network processing on our ground station, and we learned about complex software development on multiple systems which are communicating. We would like to thank the BWSI judges and team members for the fantastic coursework since we have learned so much. Thank you. This wouldn't be possible without you.
Thank you for that presentation. A quick question. You mentioned that you had a high degree of accuracy from your recognition. Do you have a number to back that up?
Yes, so on the test runs that we did for the past couple of days, we did it with 5 objects. All 5 objects were recognized, objects such as spoons, forks, bottles. And when we did it with about 11 objects, 10 out of 11 objects were recognized. So almost every object is being recognized.
10 out of 11, thank you.
Yeah, add on to there. So for the bottle, the color is similar to your carbide, while the label on the bottle is different. How did you detect the whole bottle without detecting the label?
To be completely honest, we're not sure because that's how the Sobel edge detection system works. So the Sobel edge detection is doing the edge detection for us, and we're using that to send the image back to the ground station.
Thank you.
Thank you, Team Astra, and congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. Please welcome our final team of the day, Team Lagrange Points.
Hello, I'm Allison Watson.
And my name is Bella Dunmeyer.
And we are the Lagrange Points.
So first, we're going to start with our final system overview. We built a 1U CubeSat for our mission, which was detecting colored plastic in the ocean for Dr. Ward of the Woodsell Oceanographic Institute. And our satellite contained a power bank, a Raspberry Pi, a camera, and an IMU. The power bank was used to charge the Raspberry Pi, which would then operate our camera and our IMU. And our Raspberry Pi functioned in 3 states. When our Raspberry Pi was on, it would use the IMU to detect the direction that the satellite was facing. And if our camera was facing down the proper direction, it would then take a picture. And it would then put the image into a NumPy array. And our image analyzer would create a mask that removed the background color, the color that was taking up a majority of the photo, which would just leave us with our colored plastic. And our code would tell us what percentage of the image was actually the colored plastic in contrast to the background. And when our Raspberry Pi was calibrating, it would take 20 sensor readings per photo and save to us as an offset for 5 sensor readings. And when our Raspberry Pi was off, it would sleep for 5 seconds in between the time it would take to take another photo.
All right, the main results of our testing were our satellite was able to connect to Bluetooth, it was able to calibrate its sensors, identify which direction it was facing, take a picture, report the portion of the foreground that it identified as being a color other than the background, and it was able to provide a detailed breakdown of the ranges of colors present in the image. It wasn't able to consistently read zero plastic against an empty background, which we're attributing to reflected light from surroundings and the fact that our test surfaces were not matte. So it was sensitive enough that it was seeing reflections of other objects in our test surface. It wasn't able to always see percents of the image that added up to 100%. There's a known fence post error with an approximately 2.5% margin of error for the linear interpolation function that we were using to identify color ranges. There's also the ever-present danger of floating point rounding errors, but those were relatively minor as they presented themselves in our testing. It also didn't see objects as being solid colored when they were in bright or natural light, which were basically just chalking up to noise. Calibrations making our code less sensitive would almost certainly serve to deal with that. It also didn't behave predictably when it was against a reflective or semi-reflective background, because as I said before, it sees reflections of things. When scaling it up to a full satellite, we would add a few things. We'd try to use reaction wheels to slow the rotation and prevent angle blurring. Horizontal movement of the satellite doesn't create substantial errors with how the satellite takes pictures, but the satellite rotating would create tearing and distortion that would impact its ability to get accurate readings. The camera was fine in terms of resolution, but we would either want to use a no IR or a strictly infrared camera. They both have their advantages. A no IR camera would be able to see through water, whereas water tends to block infrared waves, but would also be less scattered in the atmosphere. Either of them would be more accurate for large scale testing. We'd also use more solar panels. The one that we had wasn't able to match the power drain of all of the peripherals when attached to it, so it wouldn't have been particularly useful for charging the battery. If we were able to use 2 or 3 or cover multiple sides, we would be able to deal with that problem. Also, we would implement our power saving and charging mode, which we did design and code, but wasn't practical to implement for our small scale testing. All that does is disable the camera and IMU and restarts the satellite in order to give it more time to charge. We took away a few major lessons that would be useful for people doing this project in the future. Raspbian has a lot of dead weight included with the default package. The Wolfram engine was more than 2 gigabytes and could be removed. It's a graphical math interface that's really cool and useful as an educational tool, but not practical for accessing from Python and not essential to the functioning of Raspberry Pi. Similarly, the X server packages were quite large and safely removed. We only learned about that because while attempting to update the satellite, we overflowed the size of our SD card and identified dead weight. But that dead weight is useful for other things as well, because the more images you can save on your satellite, the more readings you can have in one place. A big lesson we learned in general: don't upgrade your system if it's in a working state. We did that. It changed a lot of the underlying API calls, and we had to go back and fix all of them. Re-imaging the SD card is faster than debugging in many cases. And we learned a very useful, practical, specific thing with Raspberry Pi cameras. there is a class defined in the PyCamera namespace called a PyRGB array, which lets you take an image directly into a variable rather than saving it to your SD card, which lets you bypass the I/O speed limitations of your SD card because those tend to be quite slow. Using random access memory is much faster. It only takes a single line of code, which I've put in the slide as an example. The one thing I would note is that while this is a useful and powerful method, it's important to implement it after you have an algorithm that works, because it inhibits your ability to check your work after it happens. We also learned a few parts as far as the hardware goes. It's important to make sure that you're very precise when doing the construction. Keeping the IMU level and oriented in the right way means you don't have to account for it facing a different direction, which just makes everything a little bit more accurate and a little bit faster. Your solar panels need to be able to produce more power per orbit than the satellite brings per orbit while in standby mode. And the camera, as I said before, should either be infrared or no infrared. Having both was affecting our color analysis.
And then some of our practical concerns was that the water could be detected as many different colors if we were to put this up in space. And then birds, buoys, coral, algae, other anything else, sea life or other objects that are in the ocean, not necessarily plastic, would be detected by the satellite, and our code itself wouldn't be able to differentiate between what was plastic and what was an animal. And then our last concern was the reflection of the sun on the water could mess with our analysis as well. It could be picked up as plastic.
And we have some time for questions from the judges.
Gary, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Apologies. I don't have a question, but I did want to reiterate one of the bullets on your slide. Don't upgrade your software in a working state. This is important for everybody.
You mentioned that the calibration is on, and you detect you do the sensor and the calibration. Can you talk more about that? How did you do that?
Oh, yeah, sure. When the code first starts running, the gyroscope takes a reading every, I want to say it's fifth of a second, looping through that 30 times. It stores all of the outputs in a single NumPy array. We take the maximum and minimum values for each direction from that NumPy array and take their average. And that just gives us a baseline so that we can, we save that as a set of 3 numbers that we subtract from all future readings taken by the gyroscope to hopefully have something that amounts to a 0, so that we can know when it's not spinning.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lagrange points, and congratulations on completing the Build a CubeSat challenge. And thank you again to all of the teams who presented today and participated in the very first SWE BWSI Build a CubeSat challenge. The judges will now have a very difficult deliberation. And while that happens, I would like to share some of the more incredible work that all of you have accomplished during this challenge. Please enjoy this highlight reel of your CubeSat prototypes performing their mission from your tech demo videos.
So the CubeSat is a 1U CubeSat.
And building this was a really long process since the holes on the acrylic and the metal weren't aligned, so we had to drill a lot of holes in it to get it to actually fit in this.
It took like 2 to 3 days to finally figure it out and like level it correctly.
And our most important components inside of
this is going to be
CubeSat
tough.
are the Raspberry Pi, the IMU, and then the camera on the bottom.
Also the battery. And they're all controlled by the Raspberry Pi, which acts as the central.
How many are we expecting?
This is our actual tech demonstration.
Okay,
we've got
here she is.
The CubeSat right here. It just plugged in and
Cool.
turned on.
I can't hear you, Rebecca.
I'm
You're
going
muted.
to connect to it
Thank
over
you.
Secure Shell. We have Bluetooth implemented, but there's an issue with the receiving port on my ground station. I'm going to, all of our code is contained within a single file named main.py.
So all we need to do in order to run it is import main. That'll send us into the first of our 3 software states. And of the 2 that are actually necessary, there's a charging state that I implemented and then realized that our solar panel doesn't charge it quickly enough for a charging state to even be useful. It's calibrating the gyroscope right now, taking 5 readings a second until it feels like it has a good value, and it begins analyzing pictures at this point.
So here is our demo of our CubeSat taking pictures of the ocean. So first we run the command to take a picture, and then as that command goes, the CubeSat will orbit the ocean and take pictures of the plastic in the ocean. So after we used a program to take pictures with our CubeSat of the ocean, or what is modeling the ocean, we used Windows SCP and a Wi-Fi connection between the CubeSat and the ground station to transfer all those pictures taken from that program onto the ground station. And as you can see, we have numerous pictures taken from the CubeSat transferred onto the laptop. Here's an example of one of the pictures. And as you can see, it is an image of our demo of the ocean. And now it will be processed using image processing to determine whether there's plastic in that picture and therefore in the ocean.
So where is our satellite? In order to accurately pinpoint the location of the plastic debris, first we have to know where the satellite and the onboard camera are located. Our flight satellite has a couple different options in order to determine this. So it could use a mixture of these 3 options. One of them is GPS, which basically uses signals emitted from existing satellites in order to determine its location. It could also use the IMU, which uses the Earth's magnetic field and gravity to determine the CubeSat's orientation. Or it could have a second onboard camera, which would be pointed at the stars and used for star mapping. On the other hand, our prototype satellite would only be able to do this by us physically moving the satellite to its target location, which in this case would be a piece of blue paper.
In terms of the orientation of the CubeSat needs to be accurately positioned and be oriented to face towards Earth, pointing straight down as it travels so that the debris in the ocean can be located. The CubeSat also needs to stabilize itself while it's in space and facing towards the Earth. For the flight satellite, the attitude determination and control system helps stabilize the CubeSat, and it also helps it rotate around its axis. The IMU in a flight satellite has reaction wheels in which torque being applied to it will result in its rotation and orientation. On the right is the RCS thrusters that in flight satellites, they help them rotate. As for our prototype, however, we are to move the CubeSat by hand since it's the best way to accurately test our demonstration given our circumstances and our limitations.
So for our CubeSat, we assembled it based off our past CAD design, and we did a shaking test to show that our CubeSat's battery, Raspberry Pi, and IMU stay in place even during moments of intense shaking, as you can see here. And then, so this is our ground station. It's our school laptop where we have stored all of our code. So let's show our CubeSat actually working. Okay. This is what it looks like when it is turned on. We have our USB-A to USB-C cable connecting to the Raspberry Pi to the power bank that allows it to be turned on. And now it's ready to start detecting some plastics.
So we do want to clarify that in this video, it shows that even when the camera detects plastic or water, it will upload the picture to GitHub regardless. That was something we did while troubleshooting some errors and forgot to take it away. So please ignore that. In our final project, we will show it only uploading pictures with detected plastic to GitHub.
Here we are plugging our Raspberry Pi into the power bank.
We demonstrated Earth's current plastic pollution problem with a simulated environment that uses a blue blanket representing the ocean littered with plastic.
Our CubeSat takes a picture approximately every 5 seconds to maximize the amount of plastic it can detect.
Our images are being transferred over to our ground station via Bluetooth. Each photo is around 40 kilobytes and takes under 10 seconds to reach our ground station, aka the computer.
These are the images that have been run through the detection code by our CubeSat. We use OpenCV and created ranges in HSV to detect color. We first detect blue in the image and then invert it to find not blue. We then create a HSV range for not white in order to remove white glare that can be found in the images we took. We then outline contours with red pixels within the areas where the colors were detected to be not blue and not white.
It also finds the centroid of contours, meaning that it can detect where in the image the plastic is located by finding the center of the plastic. To do this, we find each pixel in the contour's x and y coordinates and add all of the x values divided by the total area. We do the same for the y, allowing us to find the average x and average y. These averages determine the centroid of contours, so we can figure out where in the image each piece of plastic is located, as well as the area of each contour.
Our CubeSat uses its IMU to find its orientation relative to the Earth.
The CubeSat is also able to tell us the time the picture was taken.
The prototype does not contain a GPS. However, in a real CubeSat, the time, orientation, and orbit could be used by the ground station to calculate the location of the image.
Hi! So, as you may know, our mission is to detect plastics or plastic clusters that may be found in oceans all across the world by solely using our CubeSat. Throughout the video, we'll be discussing each and every aspect of our satellite, from the hardware of our CubeSat to our mock setup of the mission. Then, we'll cover the imaging and the actual code of the CubeSat, the Bluetooth transmission as well, that'll simulate the link connectivity between the ground station and the CubeSat, and finally, the demo.
The first step to setting up our demo is to have the CubeSat plugged in, because without doing that, our CubeSat wouldn't function. When the power bank here is plugged in to the Raspberry Pi, the code we've written will be able to run. Now, our ground station, which will be shown in a moment, has already SSH'd into the CubeSat. SSH is the function to wirelessly connect our ground station to the CubeSat to edit code and pull and push images. The CubeSat has been attached onto this extendable, this extendable metal pole. We use a pipe cleaner to fasten the CubeSat to the pole, and we use bungee cords to fasten it to this movable seat. The orientation of the CubeSat, as we can rotate it this way or that way, doesn't directly affect the image processing, since it will run the code no matter what way the CubeSat is oriented. This chair will spin so that we can capture all of the pictures, and the pole is attached to the chair using bungee cords, as I mentioned before. Now our CubeSat is ready.
Oh, hello! I didn't see you there. This blue tarp is used to mimic the color of the ocean, while these clusters of plastic are used to mimic the clusters of plastic in the ocean. Now, we don't have 4 walls to mimic or differentiate between the different oceans, but if our CubeSat was deployed into space, it would be taking pictures during the illuminated half of the orbit and rest during the dark half.
Now we will operate our CubeSat. We will first check for structural integrity and then power on our CubeSat by plugging the Raspberry Pi into the battery. We will then check that the battery is fully charged before carrying out our mission. Now we will connect our CubeSat to our ground station. We SSH into the Raspberry Pi and run the command sudo bluetooth ctl to open our Raspberry Pi to Bluetooth pairing. Then on our ground station, we open up our Bluetooth settings and connect the Raspberry Pi.
Here's a demonstration of our CubeSat. The software starts running and checks that the acceleration is under the threshold to avoid taking blurry images and that the orientation is facing downwards. Once these conditions are met, the CubeSat takes a picture and sends it through the machine learning algorithm to identify plastic. The model stores the label image if it is confident that plastic is present and returns the coordinates of the plastic.
Then, once the CubeSat is in communication mode, we will downlink the images to the ground station via Bluetooth. We first go to the directory where the images are stored on the Raspberry Pi and use the command sudo obex ftp-b, our ground station's MAC address -p, and then the file name. The images are then downlinked to the ground station where we can view them. And as you can see, the plastic in the images is boxed.
We tested our CubeSat with other pieces of plastic, and here are the results. With many different types of plastic, our CubeSat was able to accurately identify their location.
Now we will show the entire mission with the CubeSat at work. The first step is the CubeSat powering up, calibrating the camera, IMU, and in its wait state, waiting for a command to start the mission from the ground station. Next, we see the ground station, which is an Ubuntu Linux laptop, initiating the mission with the start command file. At this time, we see the CubeSat starting its mission. During the mission, we can see the CubeSat correctly detecting the position using the ADCS subsystem, correctly taking images using the camera subsystem, correctly doing lightweight image recognition on the Pi, and finally successfully transmitting images and checksum. Finally, the ground station sends the end command file to the mission, and the CubeSat finishes.
Well, thank you. Those were great videos. And now the judges have finished their deliberations, and now we have 5 awards to give out. The first 2 are special, and then we're going to have 3rd place, 2nd place, and 1st place. The first special award that we have is for the best presentation. Envelope, please. Thank you. The winner for the best presentation overall is Team Narvi. They misspelled it, Team Narvi. Good job. Next award is a special one for the spacecraft design, which the judges thought was extraordinarily good. And the winner is Team CubeCats. Take a bow. This is exciting, isn't it? 3rd place goes to the Aveng-Hers. Congratulations. I hold in my hand 2 more envelopes. Who will be the first? 2nd place is good envelopes. Team Astra, good job. Good job. And now the team with the highest score is, envelope please. The award goes to Carmel, SWENext. Well, congratulations to all of the teams who participated this year in the SWE BWSI Build the CubeSat Challenge. You should all be extremely proud of the work that you accomplished and how much you learned over these past few months. I would like to thank all of the instructors who helped put together this course, the mentors, the organizers, and judges who volunteered their time for this challenge, our sponsors who made this possible, and all of the coaches and parents who supported their students. And now it is my honor to introduce our BeaverWorks director, Bob Shin, for a final farewell.
Congratulations. You are all cool-looking Beaver ballers today. Stay safe and stay in touch.